All right. Now, as part of our study of how things pass through cell membranes, part of what I want to do is help you see how that is really used in your body. Okay, and one of the best places we can look at that is looking at how your body deals with water balance and getting rid of waste materials, and this involves your excretory system. Okay, so what we're going to do is take a fundamental look at water balance issues in animals, and then we're going to focus that down into how different animal groups actually do that, and then zero in on how mammals actually do that, and how these cells and the things we have learned about play a very important role in maintaining that water balance and getting rid of waste. Okay, so having said that, water balance and nitrogenous waste removal. Nitrogenous waste, that term probably doesn't have a whole lot of meaning for you yet, but just think about waste removal. Water and waste removal are things that should kind of go together in your mind. So water balance and waste removal are a matched set, if you will. Okay? Now, remember the importance of homeostasis. We touched on it at the very beginning of the year. All organisms, all living things seek to keep their internal conditions constant. Cells seek to keep their internal conditions constant, and once they are unable to do that, they are dead. So homeostasis is key to everything and the fundamental reason for everything we're about to talk about. Now, in terms of water, and remember, fundamentally osmosis is the fundamental process we'll talk about that relates to this, that we have spoken of in regard to cells. Water uptake and water loss. Cells cannot gain too much water, but they cannot lose too much water either. So we've got to be able to control water flow across cells, okay, and in and out of living things. Additionally, toxins build up in your body just because you do chemical reactions in your body all day long. Cellular metabolism, chemical reactions result in waste being produced, and some of that waste is really nasty stuff, and it is toxic. So the body has to have some way, again, of maintaining homeostasis, not letting that waste build up to the point where it becomes life-threatening. So we've got to get rid of it, dispose of it, alter its form, something. So both of these two things require the cells to be able to move water and or solutes in and out of cells. The waste products are solutes, and of course water is what contains them. Okay, and that allows cells to maintain homeostasis, to keep these water and these solutes in balance. Okay, so usually we discuss these ideas together as part of the urinary system in mammals, or the excretory system. It's kind of a broader term, but it is often used interchangeably. Okay, now two words that we need to think about: this idea of being a conformer or a regulator. There are essentially two paths that organisms can take in this world. They can either regulate their internal environment and maintain constant conditions inside their bodies that may be vastly different from whatever their environmental surroundings are, or they can simply have internal conditions that conform to whatever the outside environment is. So they're just going to allow their internal conditions to fluctuate with the external conditions. Think of a ectothermic animal. It lets its body temperature fluctuate with the external environment, at least to a certain degree. So that's what this slide is getting at, the idea of thermoregulation. Okay, thermoregulation being regulation of body temperature, heat. This guy is most definitely a regulator. He's a polar bear. His body temperature is a certain very high temperature, and he lives in a certain very cold environment. Whereas the snake is a conformer. His body temperature, generally speaking, is going to be reasonably the same as its environment. Yes, and let's not forget our words, endotherm and ectotherm, okay? Let's remember those words, warm-blooded, cold-blooded idea. Now, over here on the right, we have two organisms and some new words. This little guy is a kangaroo rat. He lives in the desert, generally. Desert Southwest, I believe they're found, and they hop. I think that's how they got their kangaroo status. But they are exquisitely adapted to living in the desert. They drink very little water and have need for very little water because their cells, in particular their urinary or excretory system, conserves water. They don't pee it out. They don't lose it. That means they don't have to drink it as much. And so they are what are called osmoregulators. Even though their environment is very, very dry, they maintain different conditions inside their body. Okay? This jellyfish, however, is a conformer. In the water, he's great. You pull him out, he's going to dry out. So his internal water levels, I can't think of a good word for it right now, is going to be the same as his environment. Okay? So osmoregulation, there's the word I was trying to think of, the regulation of water balance. Osmoregulation, of course, think of osmosis, and we are going to, if we are an osmoregulator, we are going to regulate carefully the amount of water in our body. Okay? So all animals need to maintain homeostasis with regard to water in their cells. They all have to, even that jellyfish. It's just that he's going to do it by never leaving the water, and he's going to maintain his water balance that way. However, if you live on land, you've got a different problem. You've got to maintain water inside your body when the dry air all around you is sucking it away from you every chance it gets. Okay? So, depending on where an animal lives, how it is going to achieve homeostasis with regard to water balance, osmoregulation is going to be different. Okay? And you need to think of it most directly in terms of freshwater organisms versus saltwater organisms versus land organisms, organisms that live on land. Okay? Now, in freshwater, your problems are quite different than they are in saltwater or on land. In fact, saltwater and land, the issues are much more similar. Freshwater is its own thing. Okay? If you are a fish living in fresh water, okay, your cells have more solute in them than the water that is surrounding you. Therefore, the concentration of water out in the environment is very high. It's fresh water. It's a lot of pure water, whereas the concentration of water in your cells is rather low. So, water is going to tend to flow into your cells, and if you don't do something about that, you're going to have problems if you don't control it. Fresh water, please remember this word, is hypotonic to the solution in your cells. It is has less solute. Okay? So water will flow into cells following its concentration gradient, flowing from high concentration to low. Okay? And it flows into the body cells through the gills, which are exposed to the water, and other body surfaces that are exposed. Okay? This could be very damaging. It could result in lysis. Please remember, lysis means pow, we are going to explode the cells, we're going to rupture them. But it could also throw off the solute balance. If you have a certain amount of solute in your cells and you keep pumping in fresh water, you are diluting the amount of solute, and that can be very damaging for organisms as well. So, to combat both of these things, essentially what freshwater fish and other organisms do is they pee all the time. They excrete, here's the proper way to say that, very large amounts of very dilute urine almost constantly. They're just getting rid of lots and lots and lots of water so that they can maintain water balance, even though water is constantly flowing from high to low concentration into their cells. Okay? So, that said, we haven't really mentioned this yet, but your kidneys are your main water balance and waste removal organs. Okay, they are controlling your water balance and your waste removal in your body. And in a fish, essentially their main concern is getting rid of all that excess water, because waste removal, if you're getting rid of all that excess water anyway, you're just going to get rid of the waste as you do that. So their main issue is getting rid of that water, and the waste is just going to go with it. We're going to get rid of the waste the same way. Okay? Now, in salt water, we've got a very different problem. Salt water is hypertonic to cells, which means we've got lots of solute out here in the salty, salty ocean, but we have less solute in the cells of this fish. So that means my concentration of water is low. My concentration of water in here in the cells is higher, so the water is going to tend to flow out of the cells of the fish. Okay? Now, all of this we just said. Okay. And that obviously can cause major problems, dehydration leading to death. We lose too much water out of our cells. Our dehydration is a problem. The salt concentrations in the animal are going to rise, not just because they take in salt water all the time, but because they're losing fresh water and the salt remains in their body. So, to combat water loss, these animals tend to have special glands that are going to get rid of salt out of their bodies, and you would never see these glands in a freshwater fish. So they're specialized glands, first of all, that will concentrate and get rid of salt and send it out of the animal's body, and remove it from the gill surfaces as well. Also, they do not urinate very much. They don't pee as much. Their urine is very, very concentrated, meaning that it is going to be getting rid mostly of salts and wastes and not very much water. Very low water content in the urine. Okay, and that means they're not wasting water all the time, unlike a freshwater fish who is trying to get rid of water. Now, osmoregulation on land, there's our cute little kangaroo rat again, is very, very similar. In a dry environment, again, you are losing water, and this time it is because the air has so much less water in it than your cells do, and so it's going to move from high concentration in your body to low concentration in the air, and you need to conserve that, otherwise you will become dehydrated. You lose water just from exhaling. If you hold a mirror up and breathe onto it, you're going to see this water vapor left on the mirror. You're losing water just to breathing. Every time you urinate, you're going to lose large amounts of water in your waste. And if you are a dry land organism, especially like this poor little kangaroo rat, water may not be easy for you to find. Okay. Additionally, since you may be urinating or sweating or whatever, you may not be keeping the salt concentrations in your body up to what they need to be either. So, now, that's a problem. And as much as animals must make sure they don't lose too much water, again, a little repetitive, we also must not allow toxic waste to build up in our cells. Okay, so we are going to relate these two processes. Now, before we talk about how they will be related, I want to talk about what this toxic waste is that's building up in your cells. Okay, it is called nitrogenous waste, and it builds up in the cells of virtually all living things, certainly all mammals. Nitrogenous waste, in a word, is ammonia. Okay, it comes from the metabolism of proteins. Okay, when you consume protein, let's say you had a hamburger, that muscle in that hamburger is made of protein and your body breaks it down. Well, a very important part of proteins, as you might remember, is nitrogen. And when you break down protein, that nitrogen byproduct that is broken down as part of the amino acids that you break down when you break down the protein, some of that nitrogen gets made into ammonia, and it is extremely toxic. You cannot have very much of this in your cells at any given time, or it will kill the cells. Very, very dangerous, very carcinogenic even. So, this is getting at what I just told you. So, when you break down food, useful stuff is obtained, obviously. When you break down carbohydrates, you're going to get energy out of them. You're also going to get these waste byproducts. Lipids, same deal. You're going to get these waste byproducts, and you're going to get the energy that you want. If you break down proteins, you're going to get these waste byproducts and some energy that you want. But, whoa, that's the toxic stuff that we don't want. And same goes for nucleic acids. If you break those down, you're going to get some of this toxic stuff that we don't want. So, the main source of this toxic nitrogen is protein. Okay, when we break it down. Nice review. Here's your amino acid. Okay, you remember the amino group, the carbon in the middle, the carboxyl group here, there's the hydrogen, there's the little variable R group. That is an amino acid. That part, okay, is where we get the CO2 and the water and energy if we break that down, but that part is going to give us that toxic ammonia that is very bad for us. Okay, so you essentially are in the process of poisoning yourself right now because your body is digesting proteins that you might have eaten. Okay, now cells deal with this toxic ammonia. Okay, it is very toxic. It is also very easily soluble in water and very easily crosses cell membranes. So how to deal with it? There are several ways to deal with it. One way to deal with it is to simply dilute the blazes out of it. The solution to pollution is dilution. Not really in all situations, but in this situation, yes. You just dilute that ammonia in copious amounts of water and you get rid of it as quick as you can. Our freshwater fish will be dealing with it that way. Now, if you can't pee all the time, if either it is not socially acceptable or if you most likely do not live in fresh water and are not constantly taking it in your body all the time, you've got to change that ammonia into something else that is going to be less toxic for you. And then get rid of that when you can. So this is what we do. We're going to change the ammonia into something that's not quite so disgusting, and we'll get rid of it as soon as we're able. Okay? So which option of these two, dilution of the ammonia or changing the ammonia, which of those you do depends on what organisms you're related to and where you live. Okay? If you are a freshwater aquatic organism, you're going to handle it differently than if you're a terrestrial organism, than if you are an egg-laying organism. There's all kinds of different ways to deal with this. Okay? If you are a freshwater animal, you can afford to lose as much water as you want to lose because you are swimming in it and you are taking it in all the time. Okay? So you deal with this highly toxic ammonia by diluting the blazes out of it, and you get rid of it with lots of water, a very dilute urine, as often as you can. And you even can diffuse it across your gill surface. Fish do that as well. So in this case, if we look over here, nucleic acids and proteins are both giving us this amino group with ammonia as a toxin. And if we are this guy, we are just going to dilute that ammonia and pee it out in large amounts of water. Okay? All right. Now, we just said this. Okay? That's just repeating everything we've just said. Okay? Now, if you are a land animal or a saltwater fish, okay, you have got to convert this ammonia into something that is not going to be quite so toxic. And then that ammonia can accumulate at least a little bit in your body without you having to pee it out every second of every day. So you don't have to lose so much water. If you live on dry land, you better believe that is important. We want to conserve water as much as possible if we live on dry land. So in these kinds of organisms, ammonia is converted to something that is less toxic. That less toxic substance is urea, the primary waste component of urine. Urea is still a toxin. We still don't want to hang on to it, which is why we still have to get rid of it. But it is much less toxic than this ammonia. It's not quite as soluble. It's just a lot less toxic. Okay, so urea chemically looks like that. I wouldn't worry about it, but at any rate. So urea, you ought to be aware, is actually made in the liver. Okay, so that's one of many functions of the liver. It looks like this. It's basically two ammonias hung together here by this carbon and oxygen. So that's it costs energy for the liver to actually synthesize this urea here from ammonia molecules, but it's worth it if you're a dry land organism. The kidney that is ultimately not making urea, the liver does that, but the kidney is going to act like a filter to catch all the urea out of your blood and get rid of it. So in land animals, the kidney is highly well developed because it is going to be the filter that traps urea and then sends it out of the body. Okay? Also, the kidney, in addition to filtering those nasty solutes out of the blood that we don't want, it also allows us to recapture water that might be headed out of the body as well, and we'll talk about that. Urine is the term for this urea, excess salts, sugars, other things that might be going out of the body that maybe we want to get rid of, and sometimes we don't, but they go anyway. And excess water. So essentially the urea and the water is the urine that we are familiar with. Okay? Urine is pretty darn concentrated. It's not as concentrated as something else we're going to learn about, but it's pretty concentrated. In other words, there's a lot of toxin and not much water to be lost in it, and that's a good thing. Okay? Mammals use urea and that method. Egg-laying animals are a little different, and the reason they deal with waste removal differently is because of these precious little eggs. Okay? If you have an egg, there's your egg, there's your little baby in your egg. There he is. Isn't he cute? Okay? And he is in this little tiny enclosed space, and there's water. He's got a little sac that contains water all around him, and if he produces urea, which is soluble, or ammonia, which is highly soluble, that urea is going to just dissolve in the water all around him. It flows in and out of membranes very, very easily, and he is going to poison himself in his little tiny house with his own waste. We really would rather he did not do that. Okay? So, in an egg, in an enclosed egg, there is nowhere to pee but in your egg. Okay? Very tiny little living space. And so we need a molecule in here that is even less soluble than that urea that we created from the ammonia. Uric acid is made by animals that lay shelled eggs. It is an even larger molecule than urea, and thus it is less dissolvable in water. And because it is less dissolvable in water, it is less toxic. It can be isolated. It won't pass through a membrane. Okay? Birds, reptiles, insects, and in particular, please remember, birds and reptiles are our egg-laying vertebrates. Okay? Use this method. Uric acid is basically urea that is polymerized. It's even bigger. It's a large molecule. Okay? And here you can see all the nitrogen containing groups on this molecule. It's a really big molecule, and it acts to precipitate out of solution. You can't let it, it won't dissolve in water. It's a solid. Because it is a solid, it can be held in a membrane, packaged away in the egg, and it will not affect the embryo. It won't dissolve in water. It's not going to poison the little embryo. And in fact, if you were to crack open an egg, you would find a membrane full of this white dust. When a bird poops on your car, and it's that nasty white stuff, unless they've eaten berries, and then there might be purple stuff in with it. But that white stuff is uric acid. It's a powder. It's mostly dry. Obviously, it's not totally dry, but it is certainly much less a problem than you're getting peed on by a mammal flying overhead. Okay? So, there is no truly watery liquid waste. Okay? Uric acid is the white bird poop. Alright, so osmoregulation in freshwater is fundamentally different than osmoregulation on land or in saltwater, but let's just stick with the freshwater to land comparison. Osmoregulation in freshwater is all about getting rid of that excess dangerous water. We certainly need to get rid of the toxic ammonia too, but we get rid of that with all that excess water we're getting rid of. Osmoregulation on land is about retaining as much water as possible, and as we are trying to get rid of waste. Okay? So think about vertebrates making that move. Certainly any life form, but we tend to think in terms of vertebrates, making that move to land from living life in the water. The threat of drying out is certainly the greatest problem that face terrestrial life forms in making that transition from water to land, from fish to amphibians to reptiles, birds, and mammals. Okay? Only two groups have done it successfully: the arthropods, all the insects and all that, and we vertebrates. Okay, what animals that successfully make it to land have done to do that? They have evolved body coverings that are going to cover their bodies and prevent water loss. Though we don't think of the skin as a very durable covering, it is highly durable and keeps water in our bodies, prevents us from losing it. The waxy exoskeletons of insects, that chitinous exoskeleton with a waxy covering, prevents them from losing too much water from their bodies. Of course, the shells of snails help keep them from losing too much water. Our keratinized skin, he's got some really seriously keratinized skin. Keratin is a protein, and we are loaded up with it in the cells on the surface of our skin, and it's waterproof, so it keeps the water inside of our skin. He's got even more keratin than we do. Nocturnal activity. Many land organisms are active at night when the threat of drying out from the hot sun is not going to be so severe. And of course, animals learn to supplement their water supply by drinking, though some animals are so well adapted to dry environments that they don't have to drink very much at all. And the kangaroo rat is a classic example. Cute little fellow. All right, we're going to stop there, and I will take you on a tour of different excretory systems in in animals as we proceed into the next podcast. Thanks for watching. I will see you in class.